Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Classical Antiquity Sidequest, a podcast covering topics from classical antiquity. The period of time is known for, as Edgar Allan Poe put it, the glory that was Greece, the grandeur that was Rome. Our next side quest will take us to ancient Greece, where we will learn all about the sports and sporting events that kept the Greeks busy in their free time. Our guide for this side quest is Dr. Amy Pistone, a professor at Gonzaga University. Dr. Pistone specializes in the areas of Greek tragedy in the ancient and modern world, as well as Greek drinking culture, which apparently, big thing. It's hot, uncomfortable, want a lot to do in your free time. You all understand. Anyway, in our interview, we cover how Dr. Pistone ended up as an official for both college basketball and college football, her career running marathons, and of course, ancient Greek sports. We will also learn why it is not a good idea to run a marathon in full Greco-Roman armor. Don't do it, folks. During this episode, you'll learn about the Pan-Hellenic Games, the Olympic Games, and about an ancient Greek form of MMA. Apparently, it's been around for quite a long time, folks. Now, because we're cross-posting this to the Bull City Coordinators podcast, we are going to find out that Dr. Pistone has a lot of connections to the ACC. Well, its current form anyway, and what it's going to become starting this season as we see the end of the Pac-12. So I think everybody who listens is going to enjoy this discussion. It's going to have broad appeal, both in the antiquity field in which the Classical Antiquity Sidequest runs in, and the athletics field in which the Bull City Coordinators podcast runs in. So apologies if we turn this into some sort of a cheap podcast crossover, which is a Simpsons reference that I'm making in case my friend Greg, who runs This Might Be a Podcast, is listening, which now we're tying into like 3 podcasts. But anyway, enough of me rambling like a crazy old man. Let's get on with the interview. Dr. Pistone, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you so much for coming on. And one thing that I like to do with new guests is get into their origin story. So tell us how it is that you got into the field of Greek studies and got to your current position.
Yeah, so I actually started off in college as a an electrical engineering major and was taking Greek myth just sort of as a breadth requirement course, and I loved it, loved it, loved it. And when I asked my TA how I could learn more about this stuff, it was he said that I should, if I wanted to go to graduate school, I should start studying ancient Greek. And I never asked the follow-up question of what do you mean graduate school? I just sort of took him at his word and started taking ancient Greek the next semester. And so eventually I bounced around majors a bunch. I was physics, history, eventually ended up in classical languages, where studied Greek and Roman languages, civilization, culture. And after graduation, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I worked in finance for a couple of years, and but I knew I wanted to teach at in some capacity, and applied to graduate school and got an offer from Michigan, and so that brought me here. So I got my PhD and taught at Notre Dame for a couple of years, and now I am here at Gonzaga University, where I get to teach all kinds of different, mostly Greek, but Greek and Roman, but heavy focus on Greek.
Did you overlap in undergrad? I saw you went to soon to be ACC powerhouse Cal, potentially. Did you overlap with future ACC legends, Aaron Rodgers or Marshawn Lynch?
I did. I
Nice.
short-lived glory days of Cal football. So we went to the Holiday Bowl, which was kind of where we peaked. But Marshawn Lynch, we really had a brief glorious moment there, and it set a really unfair expectation of what Cal football would be by being there for a really. But yeah, it's Cal football hurts, man. It's a hard place to be a fan of a football team. But yes, I was there for all of these traditional ACC powerhouse legends.
Well, I understand painful football as a Duke football fan, so I get it.
Mhm.
I mean, my undergrad institution, College Charleston, had no football, so we're still undefeated. So it's great. Now,
Gonzaga has a delightful shirt that has, we were undefeated since 1942, something like that, that Gonzaga football, when we discontinued during World War II, discontinued our football program. And we are undefeated since then. So,
can't
hang that banner.
can't lose if you don't play. Boom.
You got it.
Uh, so tell us a little bit about your main areas of focus. What are your main fields that you spend most of your academic professional time on?
Yeah, so I got started working on Greek tragedy, and that was my dissertation was on Greek tragedy and how oracles work in Greek tragedy. These sort of riddle oracles that are always misunderstood. But I also worked on drinking games a bit, and as we're going to talk about today, sports. And it took me quite a few years before I realized that there was some kind of through line between these, which really is sort of competition. I think I'm really interested in competition. And Greek tragedies were performed in this very competitive situation, these festivals where all of the plays that we have that survived from ancient Greece, the tragedies were all performed in these competitive situations. And so I think really kind of competition in ancient Greece, if I had to summarize it, is probably the central through line of things that I work on.
How were the tragedies done competitively? I that's hard for me to the closest kind of thing in my mind I can think of is figure skating, where it's decided by a judge. But how did that work?
Mhm. Yeah, so it is a judge based thing, which if I have some qualms about whether this is going to get me in trouble. I have some qualms about whether things that have judges are proper sports. I do when I teach classes on ancient sports and we want to like define what makes a sport and like the platonic form of a sport. I'm actually a little bit skeptical. I don't really think in my heart of hearts that things that have judges as compared to something where like if you get judged on whether you're smiling or whether you have a nice outfit or something, I just don't know that I think that should is as much of a sport as something that is a little bit more skill based and not objective or not like a subjective observer based. Anyway, that is beside the point, which is to say that so tragedians, so the different tragic playwrights, and we have three that survive in any meaningful number. So Aeschylus is our oldest, and then Sophocles and Euripides are our three major tragedians. But there are a bunch of others out there whose works don't really survive. And basically, you would like propose what you want to do. There would be funding for the group of people that would be in in your play. And so then you would train, you would prepare, you would do all of this stuff, and then three tragedians each year would get to put on three plays, and eventually they'd be added on a satyr play. So three tragedies and then one kind of goofy version of a play at the end. And you would have judges from each of the different demes. So sort of counties maybe is the best. So sort of divisions of Attica, the region that Athens is in. And so you would have judges, and the judges would all vote on which one they think should win, and they put their vote in a jar. And then there was this element that I think is fascinating. In addition to, so all the votes go in there, but you don't count all the votes. You only pull a certain number of votes out. And so the person who didn't get the most votes could win. If by luck and chance, like all of the votes came out in a weird order, you actually could have someone who didn't get the most overall votes. So each district kind of gets a representation, but and I should have looked this up in advance. The number it's something like six or five or something. So there'd be a certain number of pebbles that you pull out on those votes. And so then it would be whoever got the most out of that. And so like you could easily win 4 out of 7 pebbles that are out there and still not have a majority of the votes. Like you may have lost 4 to 6 overall. And this was the way generally how they talk about this is that this was letting like the gods also got to, or like chance, fortune. But this is the way that the gods also got to vote in terms of the randomness of the pebbles being picked out. Um,
Inter-
I, I do think with a lot of, and this is how they would do jury trials as well. Like there's a real concern the way they talk about why they do something versus probably the actual function. Maybe to prevent cheating, so that you can't bribe judges because it gets much more complicated if you make the jury huge. It gets much more complicated to bribe the jury, right? If you have like this kind of chaotic randomness in the voting, it gets much more complicated to try and break a competition. And so I think that's probably part of how it worked. But yeah, so the plays would be performed, and a lot of the plays that we know, like we know plays beat out some of the most famous tragedies. So some of these plays that we think of as just like this play, Antigone, or like some of these plays that are really famous and really well known did not win, and kind of no name people beat them out for whatever reason. With tragedies, we don't get a lot of information about why someone lost. With comedies, it's acceptable to like you kind of break the fourth wall and talk to the audience, and so we get comedians who talk about like why, like you clowns didn't vote for me last time. Let me tell you what's wrong with you. So we do get a little bit of insight for like why things went one way or the other. But yeah, so these are like it's a sort of competitive process to be granted a chorus to be allowed to compete in that year's festival. And then it's also like a competitive process between the three different playwrights to see who's going to win for that year.
Now, you talk a lot about competition and judging competitions. You know a lot about rule keeping and rule enforcing during competitions. Can you tell us a little bit about your background as an official?
Yeah, absolutely. Look at that segue. That was beautiful.
I tell you, you think I'm a trial lawyer, you know?
Yeah, almost would. So yeah, I actually got started in officiating because I was very angry at the sport of basketball. I got benched during my senior year, and I'd been on varsity for 4 years, and I got benched my senior year, and I was so mad at like the sport of basketball. Like I gave up going to school dances and prom, like I all this stuff because of basketball, and I got benched. So I get to college, and I'm still kind of just mad at basketball. And they were advertising for intramural referees, and I was like, great, I'll make some money off this stupid sport that I hate so much. And so I started, it was like halfway through the first semester. I was like, I miss this so much. I want to join a team. I'm sorry, basketball. I could never hate you. But so yeah, I got started refing intramural basketball, and I did basketball and soccer in intramurals. And then when I graduated, I kept working because I was working finance on the West Coast. I had my afternoons totally free. So I started working high school basketball in the Bay Area, Oakland area, Alameda, Berkeley. And then when I moved to Michigan for grad school, I kept doing it. It was a good way to make some money on the side, and I really liked doing it. It's a good way to make sure you go get some exercise from time to time. You have to run around and enforce the rules. And but I was mostly just doing basketball and soccer, which were sports that I played. And friend of mine that I played fantasy football with at the time was like, "You like football and you like refereeing." He was someone I knew. The fantasy league that I played in at the time was all former intramural referees, and so he's like, "You like football and you like refing. You should try putting them together. They're always looking for more officials." And so I went out to a rookie clinic, and I was like, if I hate it, I just have to work enough games to pay off the uniform, which like football, there's so many pieces to the football uniform. You have a hat, and you have bean bags and flags and all this stuff. I was like, if I pay off this like $150 starter kit, then I can quit if I hate this. And way before I paid that off, I was like, nope, I love this. This is so much fun. And so yeah, I've been doing football since 2011, maybe. And I still work basketball as well. So I'm now doing I work Division 1 college football and lower level stuff for women's basketball in this area.
So, what is the highest game as far as championship or uh, bowl game that you've gotten to? I ask because my claim to fame for sports is public address announcer for the D3 field hockey national championship one year.
Nice.
When I was in law school trying to make extra money, I worked for W&L's undergrad sports department. So that was as high as I climbed on the ladder. Except I guess though, I was PA at a couple of VMI basketball games, men's
Okay.
basketball games. So maybe I don't know which one. I'll go with the national title. That's a better story. I don't
Yeah,
understand field hockey
national
though.
title
Yeah, let
is.
me tell you, I watched 3 years worth of field hockey. I do not understand that sport at all. If you ask me about a penalty corner, I'm just gonna leave. I got nothing.
Well, it didn't stop you from making the national championship.
Well, I just happened to be hosted at W&L that year, so I was there that day. But yeah, let me tell you, that sport so confusing. But that was primarily what I worked were women's sports, a couple of the men's teams, and then I did some cover stuff at VMI. But how high have you gone? What's the biggest game that you think that you've been an official for?
So I have not worked a bowl game, hopefully, knock on wood. So I just moved up into so I am bowl eligible as of last year as an official. So I work in the MAC conference. So I'd been in the FCS Missouri Valley Conference for a while and got to work playoffs there, which was fun. I was down at Sac State for a playoff game in the pouring rain. And then I got promoted to the MAC. So I am now in a bowl eligible conference. So fingers crossed I'll get to work a bowl game at some point. But yeah, I would say, man, it's hard. So playoffs, FCS playoffs was really fun. I got to work a Washington High School State Championship this year, which was a cool experience out in Husky Stadium, which will now be a Big Ten school, which is the MAC is part of they call it the consortium, the COC, so the Collegiate Officiating Consortium. So Big Ten, MAC, and Missouri Valley are all kind of in one big umbrella. And so officials, kind of work your way up that ladder. And so, one day I might get to go back to Husky Stadium as a Big Ten official. But yeah, so the playoff was a cool experience to work. It wasn't a super close game, but it was a fun game to get to work a state championship. But yeah, I don't know. I got to work MACtion this year, so those midweek MAC games, and that was a fun experience. Just getting to having friends call and say like, I saw you on ESPN. I saw it like is kind of a cool experience. So I would say that wasn't really an answer. But one of those would would be the biggest game, I would say.
Since you mentioned the MAC, I'm contractually obligated to say go Bobcats, as my wife is two classes left on her master's from University of
Okay.
Ohio. So,
Okay.
and
So you
which
were
is in,
familiar with the MAC.
that's right, a little bit. We've been to Athens, ties in very
Okay.
well. She had to go up there for a like they have a requirement that you have to go at least once for something. So we've been up
Okay.
there for that. I want to go watch a football game there. It looks like a great stadium. It seems like a great place to watch a game.
It's a great place to watch a game. I had Ohio versus Bowling Green last season, which was a great game. It was, I think it was homecoming game. So yeah, I if she has to go back for something, I would really recommend watching a game. The environment, like just the whole game day environment is so much fun.
Excellent. Well, we will definitely keep that in mind. So let's go from current sports to historical sports. And let's talk about Greek sports. And primarily, I think we've all probably heard of the Olympics, but what were well, that's such a dumb statement. I apologize. We've heard of the historical concept of the Olympics, is what I meant to say. But tell us, what were the main sports in ancient Greece? What got people excited?
Yeah, so the we talk about the Olympics. We really probably should talk about them in the context of the Panathenaic game or the Panhellenic games. So it wasn't just one, right? There were a sort of rotating circuit of games. So the Olympics was just one of those kind of rotating circuits of games. So there were games at Nemea, there were games at Corinth. So you've got a kind of rotating series of competitions there, which is part of why like the idea of the Olympics being every 4 years, because it's not that there were no sports in between then. You would have other competitions going on. Um, but yeah, it's the sports that would be played at the ancient Olympics and these other Panhellenic games are not necessarily the same as what we have in the modern Olympics. I mean, there's some overlap there, but you would have so chariot racing, boxing, wrestling, an assortment of different foot races. Definitely not the marathon. That's one that people often often associate with like ancient Greece, the marathon, which is not wrong to us, but they that was an exceptional weirdo moment of someone running way too far and dying, as the story goes. The actual like that was way too far to run. Ancient Greeks had no delusions about that being an appropriate distance to run all the time. The furthest distance is like a skosh over a 5K that was run as part of the regular like the Olympic Games and the other Panhellenic Games. There was not a real interest in long distance running. That said, I well, podcasting is is famously a visual medium, but if behind
We
me
got
this
video. We got the
Okay.
video rolling too. So
Oh, perfect. The race bib behind me is actually from the Athens Marathon. Now, that was the first marathon I ever ran. I was studying abroad in Greece, and I was like, I'm here. It's during the marathon time. I'm going to run the Athens Marathon. So you can recreate the original marathon race, but ancient athletes had no delusions of that being a good idea whatsoever. I did get passed while running this marathon by someone who was in full armor gear, because like as the story goes about the ancient marathon, Battle of Marathon against the Persians, guy runs like they have to go back and tell Athens that they won, because there's Persians are still kind of coming around the coast, and they need to get this information to them quickly. So the guy runs back, Pheidippides allegedly, and runs back, says that we won, and then he dies. And so I'm like running. There was a guy that was doing this it was sort of Roman armor gear, but like, vaguely in the right
he was
ancient.
trying. He was
He
trying.
was trying. And like has sandals on, and I'm like chugging along, doing my best. And this guy passes me, and I was so mad. But I will say, before the race was over, I did pass him back, and he ended up being fine, but he did sort of collapse at the finish line. And there was a snarky part of my brain that was like, did you read the whole story? It doesn't go well for when you wear armor and run a whole distance. It's not going to end well. But he ended up being fine. They put him under like an isotherm blanket, and he was fine. But yeah, that was sort of my my first marathon experience. Was oddly ancient.
So two follow-ups on that. One, how many marathons have you ran? And I'm reading a portion of Herodotus right now to get ready for a movie review episode of 300.
Okay.
Is the marathon story in Herodotus anywhere?
Mhm.
Okay.
I I can tell you tell you where, but yeah, it's somewhere. And you actually get a weird, so okay, man, this is going down a real side type tangent here. But okay,
The
so
show is called the Classical Antiquity Sidequest. We can go wherever we want,
fair
wherever.
point. So the there's two of it. So we have Pheidippides runs this thing. But we later get an account in Herodotus. And I remember this so there's a messenger gets sent from Athens to Sparta. And when I was studying for my Greek qualifying exams, I, was like reading through all this stuff, and like was reading it in Greek and looking up all the vocabulary. And I come across this word. It's hemerodromos, which literally means like a day runner. And I was like, oh, this is the funniest word. It's like if Blade was a runner, he'd be a day runner. Like, this is such a funny word. And so it stuck with me forever. And at the time I hadn't run any, I was not a runner. And so I much later, because basically he ran like in a day-ish. He ran from Athens to Sparta, which happens after the marathon. But like at some point, the Greek historical accounts just kind of smush all these names together, and they're like, you know what? Like the guy that runs really far, that's Pheidippides. So it's a little hard to like, maybe Pheidippides was that runner, or maybe he's the marathon runner, or like ancient people are just like, I don't know, if it's a story about a guy running real far, like call him Pheidippides, which presume like they can't all be him. If he died, then the timeline breaks down real quick.
Historical
Because
records from that era are spotty at best.
like no one cares that much. It's the general vibe of like, oh, this is a Pheidippides story, right? But they so yeah. Anyway, I ran the Athens Marathon, and then ran, oh God. So I was like 20 at the time, and I hadn't really trained. I hadn't run more than 7 miles in my life before, but I was there, and I was like, when am I going to get this chance again? I was like, I'm just going to keep moving. I'm going to do it. I finished around 4.5 hours. I was like, cool. I did it. Like, great. I was very sore for the next week, but that didn't have any like really serious consequences from running a marathon without training. So like 7 years later, there used to be Nike Women's Marathon in San Francisco, and you like run up the Pacific. It's way too hilly. And around mile 18, turns out sometime between the age of 20 and the age of 27, I lost my ability to run a marathon without training. And so around mile 18, like I was in pain. There are some rough pictures of, I had a photographer right at the top of one of the hills, and like my IT band is just gone. Like my IT band is shot, and I'm like hobbling up this hill, and like, just look, it's just like the agony of defeat kind of phase. So I was like, you know what? I'm like, I'm done running marathons. Like if I can't train, and I can't be trusted to train clearly, I can't sign up for any more long races because I was in like 3 months of physical therapy. I almost had to sit out that basketball season from roughing. Like I was like, no, I'm too old for this. So like then in grad school though, I start running just as like I was like, I want to get like real fast at a 5K. I think this would be fun. I'm going to run with like a serious running group and I'm going to like start being good at this. And everyone in that running group ran marathons. And so I was like, guys, I don't want to run marathons. Like, unless I thought I could qualify for Boston, like I'm not going to run. And I don't need to do marathons. I just want to be a real fast 5K runner. I want to win all the local races and get like cute little dumb trophies. And that's what I want to do. And so eventually they're like, yeah, you could qualify for Boston now. I think you could. So I trained for I did a marathon in Michigan, qualified for Boston. So I ran Boston and then New York. I got in the lottery for New York. So I ran New York that year and then I ran Boston one more time. And Boston is really fun to do once. It's not like the weather's unpredictable. It's not a fast course. And after training through the whole winter I was in South Bend, Indiana, didn't have a running group there. So it's like snowy. We've got lake effect snow. It's just miserable. And I'm like training through the winter so I could run this. I'm going to run Boston again. I'm going to really like get a great time. And one year it was historically hot conditions, and the next year it was historically cold conditions. And I was like, this is so dumb. I am not spending my whole winter running like 18 miles in the snow by myself to have it be miserable weather. So that, however many that was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have run 6 marathons, and then I've done a couple ultra marathons because my goal. This will circle back around to the Hemerodromos. So my goal is to one day be able to do the Spartathlon, where you run from Athens to Sparta. It was a bunch of guys in the Royal Air Force. We're like, I wonder if this thing that Herodotus describes is actually doable. And so they take this idea of the day runner and they're like, okay, like 36 hours. That's like the most you could have is like a day. Like sun up one day to sundown the next day. We'll call that like a day. So you have 36 hours to run. It's about 150 miles. So that is, I think it would be really fun. And then I would declare myself the Queen of Sparta, and it would be marvelous. But I need to. So I've run a 50 miler, which means that I have a time that I can use to enter in a 100 miler. So that they think there's reason to believe you're not going to die. Like a lot of times they want a qualifying time. So I have a 50 miler, and then at some point I need to work up to a 100 miler. And if I can do a 100 miler, like maybe I could do a 150 miler. And so that is my like uh, my experimental research project is, and I have this full vision where I'm going to do it as like a travelogue, kind of like Pausanias, this like ancient travel writer. He goes around, it's like, oh, this is the place where they saw Pan, and this is the place where this happened. And like, I'm going to do all the research all along the place. And I'm going to do this like ancient travel kind of Herodotus, Pausanias style running to Sparta. It's again, I have a lot of work to do between here and there, but that is a pipe dream down the road of recreating. It is doable. People do finish it every year. So apparently, Herodotus wasn't completely crazy in saying that someone could run that in a day ish. It was sort of proved correct, and now they run it every year as a fun extreme endurance event.
Well, since I live in Roanoke, I'm contractually obligated to mention there's a Blue Ridge Marathon here every year. It goes right through our neighborhood. So just make sure you park your cars appropriately that day. It can get a little tricky getting in and out. So on the Olympics, the
Yeah.
ancient
So
Olympics,
far afield there. Yes,
yeah,
ancient
it's
Olympics.
fine. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just what this is about. So the ancient Olympics, obviously there was foot racing. One thing though I'm curious about was how long the games lasted for. I read a little bit about that. And by lasted, I mean, let's say they start in, 50 common era or be before common era and end when uh, in the common era. How many hundreds or however long do we think that these games were held?
Oh, I'm gonna have to do math now. Okay, so
See, that's why
uh,
because there's no 0 0 and it throws me off, and I don't like that. And
so
I didn't go become an attorney.
776, like the starting date that, and there's all kinds of different origin stories for the Olympics. Like, there's a mythical version and there's a historic, like there's different stories about how the Olympics get started. And but like everybody, we agree 776 BCE. And the so yeah, we would have to do math. But so what are we talking? It's so Theodosius is the guy who ends them, and that's going to be 393. So whatever 393 plus 776 minus one is, that would be how many years we're talking. So 1,000 and change.
Gotcha. Okay. And that was because there was some thought that they were pagan in origin, and we've moved past that as an
Mhm.
empire now. So y'all are gone, basically, right?
Yeah. And so our ancient games all have associations with gods. There, a lot of them are attributed to like our sources, as you know, our sources are all over the place. But they generally have, so like the Nemean games are usually associated with Heracles. There's a couple variant things, but usually associated, like Heracles founds those games. Olympic games are a little complicated, but so we have all of these different, but like they have clear connections to ancient gods. You would swear, there was an oath you would swear to Zeus not to cheat at the beginning of the Olympics, and so like they all have these connections to pagan gods, and you also get like a lot of the bad emperors. One of the things, like I think our sources don't really like say anything either way about this, but I do think there is an interest by later emperors to distance themselves from some of the bad emperors, and like you get just weird stuff happening with like Olympic games or with some of the like spectacles in the arena. So like gladiator-ish kind of things with some of the emperors who were, Nero, Caligula. And so I think there's kind of an interest in getting away from that kind of spectacle in general, because that's not the vibe that like Christian emperors want to be putting out there. So, recreating a Greek mythic battle in the arena where the emperor kills people with snakes tied onto their legs like they're giants. And in Greek mythology, giants always have like, or giants often have snaky legs. And so, that starts to be on a variety of fronts not in line with the values that Christian emperors kind of want to promote. And so we get away from all of those kinds of events later. But yeah, for quite a long time, it is still something that like across the Greek world at least, and then things change a bit when we start moving into the Roman world, where athletics hold a very different place. It's well, this is pivoting a little bit, but in the Greek world, athletes are really held up as heroes, and a lot of our so one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk about the Olympics is everyone's naked. And there's kind of a couple reasons for why everyone's so naked, but one of them has to do with like we're thinking, so nudity is very closely linked with heroism. So we talk about this a lot of times as like the heroic nude. So if you see any male figure in like a statue or whatever, whether you see this with gods, but also like a lot of prominent real life people who have statues. All of our vase paintings, right? When we're showing heroes, they're generally naked. And this is in part like the heroic nude. So there's this real ideal of this like perfect male body, and we want to show it off. We want to glorify it. It's this like prime of youth kind of moment, which is a very different like. By the time we move to the Roman era, statues start to get like people have seen some things. Like you're seeing wrinkles, you're seeing like people aren't trying to portray themselves as this like perfect form. But in the Greek world, like there's really this kind of emphasis on like this effie, this like young male athlete at the prime of his life, as like that's the ideal. And so in part, our athletes and our heroes are very closely connected to one another. As the story goes, the reason that they compete in the Olympics naked is so that you can't accidentally have a woman sneaking in. So there's kind of two factors there, but that's a way to make sure that you don't have women sneaking in, because and now everyone has to be naked. So that there's two different elements there. But one of the things I think is really interesting is that in the Greek world, athletes are like put up on these pedestals. They're treated like gods. They're treated like heroes. They're venerated. They're someone that you aspire to be like. Whereas by the time we get to the Roman world, it's shifting into like you are an entertainer for me to consume, and like the elite Romans don't want to be athletes. They want to like have athletes to watch, but the athletes, it's more sort of like a like dance for me, entertain me kind of thing. And the kind of dominant vibe is not a good aristocratic elite man should want to be like an athlete. You can go see athletes, but you shouldn't want to be like an athlete. And so that kind of shift from like sports to more like spectacle is something that we see there. So like the role of the Olympics is going to change a lot as we move from athletes are to be venerated and aspired to versus athletes are entertainment and they're here for us to watch and go like, ooh, cool trick.
And as the games kind of progressed, I mean, it seemed like the Romans were into gladiator combat primarily, and also chariot racing was a big deal. But were there other sports as it progressed from Greek to Greco-Roman?
Yeah, so I'm trying to, I mean, the one that we talk about a lot is the rise of chariot racing as a like it's sort of I would say that soccer is probably the closest like soccer football in the European where you have like clubs and there's like this culture of we have the Nika riots in Constantinople where so you're getting this like the fandom kind of becomes a big thing where you don't really see the same level of collective fandom. So like chariot racing is this place where like they had chariot racing in the Olympics. It's actually the one place where we have a female Olympic athlete because women weren't allowed to compete in the Olympics. But kind of like modern day horse racing, you like the winner of a horse race is the person that owns the horses. And so we get this woman, her name's Kaniska, and she's a Spartan woman, an elite Spartan woman. She's like related to the kings, and she sponsors a team of horses that wins, and she puts up this absolutely fantastic statue that's like I mean, it's just flexing. Like I am, you know, I'm the daughter of these people, and I alone of all women, like I won the Olympics. And so we get this like very cool inscription where like she clearly put something up to brag about how she technically won the Olympics. But yeah, but it's never you don't have whole teams that are rooting for a particular chariot. Whereas when we move into this kind of like team chariot racing context, then it becomes much more like you have your sort of like you know your Man United fans or whatever who have like that is an identity and that's something where like yeah, you might go out and get in a fight with the Chelsea fans after the game or whatever like that's you get that kind of element coming through much more as we move into like Rome especially like later Roman Empire.
So you mentioned that women couldn't participate other than owning the horses, but I mean, they couldn't compete, but what roles did they play? I saw something online recently about a woman who was like a personal trainer or something, but what roles or what positions could they find themselves in relation to the Olympics when the games were going on?
So not a lot when the Olympics so we get little bits and pieces of women that are sort of peripherally involved in these things, but for the most part, they're not allowed as spectators and they're not allowed as athletes. But there were a handful of different races or like events, competitions that were just for women. So there is kind of a women's sports circuit, something like that. They just aren't really allowed to compete with the men. But you do get so the Haraya, so it's a festival that was in honor of Hera. You have women doing that. We have a variety of different. We actually have some inscriptions that are really cool that talk about some of these different female athletes. So you do have women who are doing athletic stuff. A lot of times it's women from Sparta, where there's a very different culture around like what women's bodies should be like, what women should be doing. So a lot of them are Spartans, but then you also have as we move into later time periods as well, you do get some. I just love this because we have a really fun surviving. It's like a stele uh, female gladiators as well. So we do know that there were female gladiators, not a ton, but yeah, in terms of the ancient Greek context, they really mostly have their own stuff that they're doing. And there's different events. There's one Athletates, you like it's sort of a chariot to running event. So you hop off the chariot. So we had a lot of these, and oftentimes, like most of the physical things when women are being praised for their physical accomplishments, it's usually sort of younger girls. So before you're at an age where you're supposed to be getting married and doing like married lady things, having kids, and there's an assumption that you're sort of less outside of your house at that point. But for younger girls, there's a lot of like you can, running around, and we get a lot of we mostly see this through right like sort of coming of age festivals, like rite of passage kind of festivals, where we see women talking, they're being praised for their athleticism. They talk about like, look at them running around and jumping and all of this stuff. But it's for the most part, like obviously ancient Greece isn't a monolith, but for the most part, it's seen as being something that like it's okay for young women to do, assuming it's in the right time and place. But older women shouldn't really be doing that so much.
And were the games pretty much the same as the men would participate in?
That is a good question. I am trying to think, like I would have to kind of go through the events that we know happened. It was mostly racing events, like foot races, and things of that sort. I don't know that we have women boxing at all. I'm just trying to, I would have to go check and see which, but yeah, it's mostly the ones that come to mind, are all kind of foot race type events.
And you mentioned earlier that different cities had different games. So I'm just curious, was it one set place where the Olympics would be, and then there were games in other cities, or did the Olympics rotate through very clean and not at all illegal or illicit bribery schemes, like may or may not happen today?
Right. Yeah. Allegedly, bribery schemes. Yeah. So, they would be at they would have a set place. So like, you know, Olympia would host the Olympic Games. And we have, so there was a big statue, like Zeus. Zeus is kind of the prime god there. And so, there's a big statue of Zeus. You would see out along, I actually really love, so you would have your oath that you swear before that you're not going to cheat. And the temple that had like the all the Zeus stuff there, the temple of Zeus, in the metapiece, like the part where it's showing like pictures, inscribed sort of stories, pictures carved into the top of the temple, they have the story of, it's sort of, so Pelops, who is the son of Tantalus, mythologically, Tantalus tries to serve his son as a meal to the gods. This is just a real messed up family. So he tries to serve his son as a meal to the gods.
Look, uh, I got two kids. I'm just saying we've all been there. We've all been there.
Yeah, fair point. So all the gods, with the exception of one, are like, ooh, gross. We don't eat people. Um, Demeter was sad her daughter was missing, so she like eats a bite. So Pelops now has a like an ivory shoulder that they put the gods put him back together. Like good. Tantalus gets punished forever in the underworld for this is where we get the word tantalizing. He is tormented by food he can't quite reach above him and water he can't quite drink below him, because he screwed up in the realm of like eating and drinking wrong. So his son, so we have one level of curse on this family. Then his son wants to marry this princess. Her name's Hippodamia, and you have to like win a chariot race to get the princess. And we get a lot of these sort of Atalanta, you have to beat her in a foot race to get to marry her. Like this is a fairly common trope. And so he bribes, like basically he cheats. He bribes the king's chariot driver to put a like wax peg in instead of wood, so it's the chariot falls apart. And so he wins, but he promises the guy, he's like, you can have the first night with the princess if you help me out. And then has a change of heart, and so kind of goes back on his oath and kicks this charioteer, off of a cliff. And as he's like falling to his death, he curses, Pelops and so like eventually this cursed family, you get a curse at like every level until eventually, Agamemnon is the bottom of this cursed messed up family. But, um, so Pelops is this kind of story of someone who cheats at a chariot race. And so you get this whole story played out, like as you're giving your oath to like, I will not cheat. I swear to Zeus that I will not cheat. You're looking at the story of Pelops, who is like this famous cheater. And so, yeah, there's like very site specific elements of each of the games. And there are different, so we have a poet, Pindar, who writes victory odes praising Olympic victors. And so we know a lot of, different details about the specific games and the victors, because we get these long praise poems that Pindar writes about, like, oh, the guy that won the horse race this year is super great. And then it almost always, in kind of a weird way, it starts off with like, oh, he's great. He ran so fast, or his chariots were great, or his horse was great, or whatever. And then it pretty quickly pivots into like a cautionary tale of don't don't get cocky, don't think you're better than everyone. So they're like deeply strange as praise poems, because it's ostensibly meant to be honoring this guy, but like 95% of it is like, don't get any ideas. You're cool and we're proud of you, but don't get any ideas. And so, but yeah, so each of the places you would get sort of specific stories, specific gods, specific elements that are associated there. So there is none of this shady bribing. A lot of the things that make, I'm not going to say the ancient Olympics weren't like didn't have problems, but um, they are much less problematic to my mind than the modern Olympics. It was a place you would have like wars would you would have like a truce for the Olympics. And a lot of this is the kind of thing that inspired the modern Olympics when people were like, we should have a modern Olympics. We should bring this back. It's these kind of the ideals of all of these different places, and we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate sport and we're going to stop our wars and like maybe we can have what we now call kind of like basketball diplomacy, but like we're gonna have like peace and we'll compete in sports rather than competing in war. Like it's a lot of those kind of ideas that inform the modern Olympics, but you also get a ton of other problematic things. We get the elevation of amateurism as this great glorifying we must have amateurs. That is the only way that you can compete in the Olympics. The corrupt, the labor problem, I mean, just all of the things that go around with the modern Olympics is you thankfully don't have that kind of stuff with the ancient Olympics.
What you're saying about a truce during the Olympics is interesting because it's sort of like the Sunday truce in The Wire that they talked about, where everything's shut down for a day. But I find that interesting. I'm curious though, were there like different tiers? Like we have major and minor league baseball, for example, were there semi-professional stuff, amateur stuff? I mean, could people make a living being athletes? How did that work?
Yeah, so there is not there's not really amateur sports in that they sort of alluded to there isn't really like this idea that amateur like there's something important about an amateur status. So that isn't like a separate tier of competition. Early on, it's only the like you needed people who had leisure time for training, which was only going to be elites. And so it's I guess kind of amateur in earlier days of Greek competitions. Um, by the classical period, you have a professional class of athletes that's developed, and so um, you basically like the city or city state has an interest in having victors from their. I mean, the same way that the Olympics is now, right? Like the U.S. really wants to win the most gold medals, and so you get kind of a people can be a professional athlete, right? You can survive as an athlete. In part because you have a much more kind of infrastructure built in there. So there's, well, two things. So one, like in the actual competition, you have kind of two classes, like two age groups. So you have the man category and the boys category. So there's kind of two divisions that people can compete in. But then yeah, there are less well known. So like the Panhellenic Games are I don't know, the majors sort of. Whereas like there's a bunch of, I don't know, like tennis or golf, right? There's a bunch of other competitions that are there. They don't have the same prestige, they don't have the same payouts, but there is a lot of other competitions going on. And so you have sort of a similar, like you get the most glory from the Panhellenic Games. I don't think Pindar ever writes odes for people who don't win like the biggies. Like no one's, talking about like the California Open or something like right. It's a U.S. Open. Like you got major events. And so like Pindar doesn't. I don't think, to my knowledge, he doesn't write anything that isn't for one of those major events. Like there's a real difference of the kind of prestige there. Um, but yeah, in terms of like, I guess what you would think of as like I don't know, AAA teams or the G League or something like that. You do have a lot of those kind of places where people can compete and make a name for themselves, even if it's not at the highest levels.
And so, did they have off seasons, or was it like a year round thing for like? Well, I guess when I think of Greek sports, other than the Olympics as an entire thing, I think of chariot racing, for example. Was that year round, or was there like an off season where like LeBron is going to go recharge his batteries and be like, look, there is no reason that a man my age should still be this dominant in professional basketball. Yet somehow I'm able to do it. I mean, did they have that time to refuel?
That's a really good question. I don't know offhand about like kind of the off season from those minor like the smaller tournaments because yeah, there is sort of there's like a really rigid schedule for the major things, but I don't know. I will have to look into that. I will get back to you on that one.
Okay. All right.
No, it's a very good. I mean, especially the thinking about some of the really rough sports. Like you're gonna need a downtime, right? I mean, you're gonna need to. I don't. We have one really good. It's basically like a manual for trainers, and it's kind of a fun text in terms of. But I don't think like he talks that much about rest and recovery there. I'll have to go check. But it's one of the places we get a ton of information about like what exercises you should be doing, how to best, and it's like partly it's so weird. So it's kind of like a training manual combined with like how to do a scouting report. Like what do you look for in a potential person that you should like sign to come like, you know, do you want thick legs? Do you want long legs? Do you want like broad shoulders? Like what are the and so it's like this kind of but it's really it's meant for trainers. Like it's a manual for a trainer. Like how do you scout and how do you train your athletes to be best? I can't think of a lot of discussion of rest. I will have to go look at that though because I don't know. Like we know that rest is important when you're training for something now. Um yeah, that is a marvelous question.
So on the scouting concept, were they into advanced sabermetrics or Moneyball type of stuff, or where did it come down? Was it just a bunch of guys in the room saying, his leg angle's all wrong. He ain't gonna cut it.
Yeah, yeah, it's much more the like pre-money ball kind of scouting of like, I like the look of that guy. He's got a good, good vibes, good attitude, good
He's got
whatever. Like,
it.
yeah. Yeah, there's definitely like it's not completely vibes-based scouting, but there is a lot of like, what do you think is most important for a boxer? Like, I mean, we still don't agree on what makes, you probably want long arms, but you need endure. There's different types. There's guys who can take a lot of the kind of like rope-a-dope boxers. There's boxers that are much more aggressive. Like, so in terms of what is the ideal physical type, it's pretty, I mean, they're just making stuff up. But there is an attempt to sort of systematize it, like they're acting like there's more science to it, which is how we do a lot of nutritional science these days anyway, of like, oh yes, we definitely know what the best diet is, and we definitely know all of these things, except like, you get a giant Eastern European guy who can just like wreck the NBA and looks nothing like the ideal athlete form. Like there's stuff you just can't account for. Like sometimes you look at Michael Phelps and you're like, nope, that man has supernatural lung capacity. I get it. That is what I think a swimmer should look like who is successful. And then you get like a Luka Doncic who's just out there like you don't look like you should be killing it, and you somehow you are.
He looks more suited to a late weekend bowling, Miller Lite, Coors Light drinking
Looks like
tournament.
he would crush it at like beer league softball or like one of those adult kickball leagues. Like, and yet somehow he's kind of unstoppable. It's
It it really is unbelievable. I mean, it's really unbelievable. Now, you complimented my question asking. I'm going to completely ruin that with a pronunciation issue here.
excellent.
So uh, I'm gonna ask for your assistance here. Uh, a sporting event, pancration.
Yeah. So I say pancration. A lot of people say pancration. They do that like TI. So it's literally it translates like like pantheism, right? All, and then the krat part, like it's the root like democracy, like that krat part, like power. It's like all violence, I guess.
What?
All force. So
T
yeah, it's
t
this wild, like it's basically it's pretty close to MMA. So it's an event where you the only rules are that I mean it yeah, you biting and gouging the eyes. And so it's very much like MMA in terms of there not being any real rules. And it's pretty rough. Like it's I yeah. You had told me like the your question about like is it as bad as it sounds? And yeah, it's basically like an all out fighting. And it's pretty violent. It's I think it is as violent as it sounds like it would be. Um, there really aren't a lot of rules in it at all.
Well, Victor, there you go. Now you know. Yes, super violent. Now, were there any sports that required wearing of armor? I mean, I don't know if gladiator fighting was as big in Greece as it was in Rome, but
Mm-mm.
were there any sports like that that you had armor or shields or
Oh
if
my God,
so?
I'm so excited that you asked about this because so there's an event called the Hoplitodromos. It's the same root like hoplite for like
Yes,
a
yes, sure, I know
warrior.
about that. Yes.
The signature, if anyone's played war video games with Greece, you're familiar with the hoplite, the signature Greek military unit. Um, so it's that plus like dramos is just a word that means run. So hoplitodromos is a armed running. So you do it in your armor. So that's the I would say kind of the most challenging of the ancient events. Like so instead of running further, which we generally think of like harder harder events or the longer ones, like 5K anyone can do, and a marathon is really hard. What they tend to do instead, like the if you want to make it harder, you just put heavy armor on and do the event that way. So you have sort of it runs, I believe it's a DL lost length. So there's like one distance down is the awa, and then a DL is you come back the other way. So generally our units are sort of a down, like down and backs are the units that we use. Um, and so the Hoplatodromos is one of the like you run one of the longer distances, but you do it fully armed. And so yeah, it's always struck me as more like a Spartan race or one of those kind of things where like you're not running a crazy distance, but you're making it very hard. You're really amping up like the badass level by putting on all kinds of weighted vests and things like that.
I mean, good for you. That's what I said. You were talking about all those marathons and the 50 miles. And I was just like, you know what? I'm good with my 2.5 when I run. Just take that. I don't, I'm too old. You were like 27. I was too old. I'm sitting here, I'm like, I'm 42. I hurt every moment of my life. I'm never not in pain. Anyway,
Yeah, I will say the especially like this is the time of year when like I really need to start getting in game shape for refereeing, and it's just a different type of conditioning. Like I'll take my dog for like a little jog and it's pretty steady state and just like plugging along, and the ability like the type of condition that you have to be in to like stop and start over and over, and like basketball is so much more like pivoting, you're cutting back and forth. But like football is like you're going from a dead, you're not moving, and then all of a sudden like a Division 1 wide receiver is running a route, and like now I need to now I need to be keeping up with them. I work the position. I'm a back judge, so I work the position that's back with the receivers mostly. And 7 plays, like nothing, run up the middle, no problem. Little pass out in the flat, no problem. And then all of a sudden, like future NFL athletes are sprinting and I need to make sure that I beat them to the goal line. So yeah, the ability to sort of go from like stop, sprint, change directions. There was an interception. Now I got to go back the other way. Like that kind of conditioning. Like I'm just so sore when I start doing my like specific game ready conditioning, and I'm never ready. Like the first game of the season for basketball or football, there's always like, oh, I didn't think about that muscle. I'm sore in a muscle that I didn't think existed. Interesting.
that's why you're probably after you get towards the end of the season, you're like, can we please have a triple option team? Can somebody just run the wishbone, give me a break? I mean,
Well,
especially like if you
the
get
weather
into the
gets
bit.
bad at the end of the season too. So like don't air it out. It's cold. It's rainy, it's windy, and like now no one's gonna catch it. It's cold and windy and rainy. Why are we just run it? Just run the ball.
The running backs are like, come on, give us a break. All right, come on. We can only take so many hits. Uh, but one thing I did want to ask, though, there were a couple other things I wanted to cover with you. So, if you could give us a good book to read about ancient Greece and also a future podcast topic that you would like to hear covered,
Ooh. Um, like anything about ancient Greece?
fire away. It's anything that you would like. I'm not promising I'll make it happen, but I will at least try.
Um, so I would say, I'm just trying to think like the things that I feel like don't get talked about enough. Um, that is a really, I don't think you warned me about this question in advance, by the way,
Yep.
when you,
Well, no, it was. It's down at the bottom.
okay.
It's the last
Yeah.
one. It
Okay.
gets
That's,
everybody, but I include it. They're like, oh wow, never thought about that. But it's there, I promise.
no, that's fair. I would say, I guess I'm sort of, I'm biased because this is something that I think about a lot, but I think what happened at symposia, like so the drinking parties, that isn't what Plato tells us about. Because I feel like every time we talk about ancient Greek drinking parties, everyone wants to talk about Plato. And there's so many interesting things going on there that are not Plato's weirdo, like, and to be fair, I have beefs with Plato on a variety of fronts. But his his version is such like a clearly made up symposium, and there's so many other things that are happening like that we know about, and we know what the rooms look like, we know what the games would have been, we know about the food, we know about all these things. And Plato, like at the start, the guys in his dialogue are talking about how like a bunch of us drank way too much last night, and we so like let's just go easy on the drinking, like let's not drink a lot tonight, because like half the heavy drinkers are hungover and the not so heavy drinkers can't keep pace with the heavy drinkers. So we're not going to drink that much. We're going to get rid of the entertainment. We don't want a flute girl in here because that's going to bring the whole like we can't do philosophy if there's like someone playing flute music. So like let's have, and it's this like super philosophical. Like no one at a party is like, I just off the cuff have an extremely elaborate speech I can give about love. Like no one has that. And yet, when every time we talk about the symposium, everyone wants to talk about Plato. And it drives me crazy because he's clearly doing something very different. Um, and so yeah, I think I would love to have a podcast episode I could give my students where I can just tell them like listen to the stuff that's not Plato. We can read Plato, whatever. It's great. It's a beautiful work, but I would love for people to talk more about like what happens at drinking parties. And like we have crazy fun stuff. Like there's a special word for the time where like after you've been drinking, you go wander around the streets and like the drunken walking around. Like we have a name for it. It's a whole thing. And we see it on vase paintings of like people stumbling drunk around in the streets, and nobody talks about all the other stuff. It's always just like, well, Plato tells us like Plato was doing his own thing, and I don't think he was fun at a party anyway.
Uh, Fair. That's fair. So, give us a good book to read on ancient Greece. A lot of the people who listen are kind of folks like myself who have a casual interest and got into this kind of through podcasts and some other things. What would be a good starter?
So does it need to be historical or could it be like, oh,
Anything.
okay. So there's a modern, okay, so I have two suggestions. One is, so I do a lot of work with Greek mythology. And I really like, there's a book called, it's only barely about Greek stuff, actually, now that I think about it, but I'm going to tell it anyway. It's called Women and Other Monsters, and it's about gender in Greek mythology. And most of our monsters are female coded. And so, like, it's just, I've assigned it to some of my students. I love it so much. It's a phenomenal book. And I think it's a really interesting, especially like there's so many kind of feminist retellings of myth right now. And I think this is like it's a series of different essays. Jess Zimmerman writes it, and like it is phenomenal. I cannot recommend it enough. Um, I I'm just like looking over at my bookshelf here to see like what one I would most recommend. I just don't have a lot. I wanted to do something history related when you asked that. You didn't tell me about book recommendations for the
I
record.
did not. That is true. I will concede that. I've added that at the last minute.
Um, I well, I'm actually going to stick on the like women in Greek mythology vibe. I really like uh there's a recent book by Ruby Blondell about Helen of Troy that I think is really great. And hold on, let me find out what the name of his it's like Many-Minded Man. Let me get the name right. Yeah, Joel Christensen, who he's a professor at Brandeis, he has a book called The Many-Minded Man. It's about the Odyssey, and it's like kind of a psychological look at through the Odyssey, and I really love it. And it's one that I've given to students, and they tend to really like it as well. So I would say those are sort of ones that aren't too like nitty gritty in the weeds, that are like fun and accessible to anyone. If people are into history, this is unrelated, but there's a book about Mongols that I just read. I am obsessed with it. It's Genghis Khan, Mongols in the Making of the Modern World, or something like that. I am obsessed with it. If people want Genghis Khan, Modern World. Yeah, Genghis Khan in the Making of the Modern World. It is phenomenal. I just finished it. And for someone who spends a lot of time thinking about ancient empires, um, like putting Alexander the Great, putting the Roman Empire like in context of what was going on with the Mongols was amazing. Like it has nothing to do with ancient Greece, but it is such a good like public accessible history book.
Okay. That is a lot there. Maybe in the book on the Odyssey. No, I'm excited about that. Maybe in the book on the Odyssey, we can get a discussion of how it is so many Trojans survived what was supposed to be a war that wiped pretty much all of them out.
Well,
I
you gotta have origin stories for all your cities. Like you need enough that like you can go found lots of cool new cities. But yeah,
I
there's
get yeah, I mean, I just finished the Aeneid and I'm like, how can Aeneas be this confident about going to war when he should literally have like three guys with him? But
yeah.
there's everybody's Trojan is what I took away from that.
Well, and like you get all of these other like yeah, you're just wandering around like Aeneas bumps up into like oh, there's like little Troy over here. Like people are just like yeah, there are an absurd number of things that want to trace their ancestry back to Troy for like allegedly because it's supposed to be. I mean, on some level, man, I'm just kidding. But on some level, like there's accounts that suggest that part of like the purpose of the Trojan War is that there's too many heroes. Like we just got to get rid of the heroes. Like whole race of heroes, we got to get rid of them. We have some like they're not in Homer, but some other like epics fragments and things that talk about how like the earth was way too heavy. Like Helen is not the child of like Leda, who everyone says she's a child of. It's actually Zeus and Nemesis having a child to like for the purpose of like Nemesis is the origin of this. Like we have to. There's too many heroes. The earth is too heavy. It's very much echoes like the flood narrative in the Hebrew Bible of like we just got to get rid of there's too much bad stuff here, we got to get rid of it, except the bad stuff is the heroes, and like it's meant to be a war that's going to decimate heroes, and like it's the end of the heroic age, like nothing. Odysseus gets home and like he has a son, I guess, or whatever, but like it's really the end of the heroes. All of like that's the last major thing. Once everybody gets home from the Trojan War, like the age of heroes is over. Now we're in like the age of normal boring people. And so like for it's kind of meant to wipe everybody out, and yet like doesn't totally wipe everybody out in the way that it seems like it's sort of meant to on this like cosmic scale.
All right. Well, Dr. Pistone, thank you so much for coming on and taking some time to be with us. We've covered a lot of things today. We've got really into some very interesting parts of the sporting world in ancient Greece, and we've learned that while I may ask good questions, my classics pronunciation is terrible. So I didn't take Latin. I'm from the upstate of South Carolina. You can only expect so much from me. Okay. All right. So with that in mind, I have got to schedule some more interviews. So I'm working on that. Stay tuned. We will do our best to keep this thing coming. In the interim, check us out on our website, bullcitycoordinators.com. Check us out on Twitter at AntiquityPod. And you can check out us on most of the socials at Duke FB coverage. Remember, this was an offshoot from a sports football themed podcast. Again, I didn't plan this out. It just happened. So don't judge me. So check us out there. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, the Classical Antiquity Sidequest is a podcast without end.